Good afternoon. My name is Jesse Wieland. I'm the Assistant Director at the Office of National Fellowships at Florida State University. And we're going to be talking today about the Fulbright U.S. Student Program, specifically the academic and research focused opportunities. And so we're going to be talking about all of the components of the application. We're also going to be talking about what makes for a compelling application at the national level. I'm also going to highlight some students that I've worked with in the past, talk a little bit about their projects to hopefully help you in reflecting on your own project and ideas. We're going to go over the internal process for FSU and dates and deadlines that you will need to meet. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how my office and the Office of Graduate Fellowships and Awards can assist you. So this is just a little bit of the history on Fulbright. You're more than welcome to read it if you would like. I'm not going to go into detail, but the main takeaway from this is that when Fulbright was founded, it was founded to foster peace and understanding between the United States and other nations. And that mission is still its first and foremost objective. So the vehicle by which you do that can be your academic study or just the nature of your specific Fulbright project. But first and foremost, Fulbright review committees are going to want to see how you have committed both within and outside of your project, how you have committed to fostering that mutual peace and understanding between the United States and the country that you are proposing to travel to. It's sponsored by the U.S. State Department. To be eligible for Fulbright, you do need to have your bachelor's degree by the time that you start. So if you're a current undergraduate in spring of your junior year or senior, we would love to work with you on this upcoming cycle. But if you are also a master's or doctoral level student, we are also open to working with you. And I already kind of mentioned the focus is that mutual peace and understanding. I touched on the first element of this in terms of your eligibility. You do need to have your bachelor's degree at least by the time that you would start your Fulbright opportunity. Those typically, they all vary, but they typically start in August. And so if you are in the spring semester of your junior year, we would start working with you now, because you would submit in the fall semester of your senior year, and then you would start the fall semester following graduation. It's like a rough breakdown on the timeline. You do need to be a US citizen, and you do also need to, dependent on the country that you apply to, meet the language requirements. And so that can vary from anywhere from no requirement in the language to novice, intermediate, or advanced level. I'll talk a little bit more about that later in how you can show that proficiency in your application. And you need to be in good health. And so that's something that if you have concerns about that, I would just speak one-on-one with your advisor about what those concerns may be. So for the Fulbright academic grants, they are open in over 160 different countries, and they vary in duration from anywhere from 8 to 12 months. But the Fulbright grant, it covers your travel expenses, it covers your cost of living, health insurance. You do get a monthly stipend, so you won't be living lavishly, but they will take care of you during the time that you are in country. Fulbright grants are very malleable. And so if you're proposing a research project, unless it's explicitly stated, these projects are open to a vast number of fields. And even if it's not explicitly stated that it is accepted in that country, but if you can find a creative way to mold your project to the place that you're applying, then we can talk about how to make your project adapted to that place. A good example of a student who used Fulbright as an opportunity to expand upon their current work and their current research is Mackenzie. And so when I worked with them, they were a service scholar at Florida State, which is essentially an award for students to travel abroad or domestically, but to complete a summer research project of their choosing. And so Mackenzie chose to travel to Brazil the summer before their senior year to work on a poetry project. And their poetry project focused on Black and Indigenous communities in Brazil, and had an amazing experience, was able to create some really wonderful work. But at the end of that experience, what they noticed was that I can take this project even further with even more research, with even more proficiency in Portuguese, and even more guidance. I can grow this project into something much greater, and ultimately came up with this idea to expand their work to juxtapose the experience of Black Brazilians with the experience of Black people in the American South. And so that is an excellent way to pitch a Fulbright project, is to continue to build off of something that you either have already researched or something that you've already dabbled in to some extent. Not that that's a prerequisite. And so McKinsey was able to use their in-country experience to their advantage. And so if you do have in-country experience and you want to travel back to that country, that's great, but it is also not required that you have that in-country experience to craft a compelling project. This next student, and something that I always tell all of my students, and this from my applicants who, like, this is their first time applying to an opportunity like this, all the way to my applicants that this isn't their first rodeo and they know how to put together a extremely compelling application, is that Fulbright, while we want all of our students to obviously receive their Fulbright, it shouldn't be the be all end all of your goals, whether academic or professional. And so when I was working with Charles, we knew going into his application that he was applying to an extremely competitive country. I believe the United Kingdom is the most competitive country for Fulbright Awards, and they only offer academic and partnership fellowships. So you are either pursuing a degree or pursuing research exclusively in the United Kingdom. And so going into his application, we were like, hey, we're going to work really hard on this, but we know that there's I think a less than 1% acceptance rate. And I don't say that to deter any students, because with our numbers this year, we actually have 3 or 4 semifinalists to the UK. And so we're pretty consistent as an institution in sending students to the United Kingdom. But Charles and I crafted an application where he was wanting to travel to, I believe it was the University of Sheffield, and earn his master's in public health, and specifically studying access to healthcare for marginalized groups within Sheffield. And so the complicated aspect for his application was, not only do you need to make a case for why do you need to study in the United Kingdom, but you need to make a case for why do you need to study at this university in the United Kingdom. And so when Charles was doing his research, he noticed that the city of Sheffield, and I believe in partnership with the University of Sheffield, was already conducting research in terms of accessibility and equity when it comes to their healthcare. And so Charles was wanting to join this project and this initiative, and off the top of my head, I can't recall the name of it, but wanted to ideally focus on 2 aspects of that research. And he reached out to the university, he applied to the program, he was able to acquire an affiliation letter from a faculty member at that university that was in support of his project. And so, long story short, put together an amazing application that was ultimately selected as a semifinalist for the United Kingdom, which is not receiving the fellowship, but like I said, with how low their acceptance rates are, to be nominated as a semifinalist is an amazing honor. But after we finished his initial application, before we even found out that he was a semifinalist, the conversation shifted to, okay, so what are we applying to next? Because Charles applied the summer going into his senior year. And so we immediately pivoted from his Fulbright application to his graduate school applications, his domestic ones in the United States. And so going through this Fulbright process was an amazing learning experience. And he took so much of what he had written about, both from the personal statement components to his ultimate career and professional goals. We just took that, molded it, and just adapted it to these graduate school applications. And so while he ultimately wasn't nominated for the Fulbright Award, he took the application and the work that he did, applied it, like I said, to his graduate school programs, and ultimately enrolled in an NPH program at the University of South Florida, and just graduated this past spring. And so just to reiterate, with all of our students that are applying for these academic and research opportunities, going to work on that application to the best of our abilities, but then we hope that we can pivot from that to your other plans, whether those be through graduate school or any other fellowship opportunities or internships and jobs post-graduation, because the goal is that spring of your senior year, and I'm speaking from an undergraduate timeline because that's predominantly who I work with, but hopefully that spring of your senior year, you have options in front of you. So you're not just, putting all of your eggs into one basket. Now, the application for Fulbright is extremely dense, and that's why we recommend reaching out to an advisor to have someone who can support you through this process. And so the general online application for Fulbright is it's a very deconstructed resume. There are a lot of components to it, and it takes a lot of time to fill out. And so we recommend doing that incrementally. There are also, and while I'm going to talk about the two major essay components, there are shorter responses that can often be overlooked in the application. And so these short responses ask you to provide, like for example, a brief summary of your project. They ask you to, when appropriate, articulate your own language proficiency, or they ask you to talk about your host country engagement and what you hope to do beyond. And so the point is that go through this online application very carefully and intentionally craft all of these small components. So holistically, your application does a great job of reflecting you and your experiences. But the two major components that you would be working either with myself or one of my colleagues on is going to be your statement of grant purpose and your personal statement. In total, it's 3 pages of writing, single space, and technically a little bit less than that because you have to devote a few lines to your heading. So the point is, we need to be very intentional with the information that we include and how concise and clear we are with that information. And so in the statement of grant purpose, the focus of that project, I mean, obviously it's going to be dictated by whether you're applying to an exclusively research-focused opportunity, an academic degree opportunity, or one that kind of falls in the middle where you're both earning a degree but are also engaging in research during your Fulbright project. And so we need to first and foremost establish why are you applying to the country that you are applying to, or why, or like I talked about with Charles, even this university that you are applying to, before we then get into the nitty gritty of your project. And so what is the scope of your research, or if it's one of the academic degree programs, what is the course, what are the most important courses that you're taking, or how are you going to, in the word to remember is feasibility, how are you going to feasibly complete this project in the time that you are given, so in those 8 to 12 months. So you can also detail the timeline of your project when you are talking about these components. Fulbright also wants to see, and this goes back to their mission of mutual peace and understanding. So both within your project, but even beyond your project, how are you going to engage with the people and the culture in the place? And that's obviously a very multifaceted and nuanced answer. It's going to be unique to every applicant. So in essence, your statement of grant purpose is giving the reader, okay, so where are you going? What are you doing? Why are you doing it? And what is the impact that it could have? And then I always recommend starting with the statement of grant purpose essay, because I believe so much of that essay influences the narrative that you write in the personal statement. And it is 1 page, but it's not a full page devoted to just your story. And so with my students, and obviously this is a little subjective, but I tell them that you have about half a page to tell me a story, a relevant story about you, your experience, or how this has led you to this project, this place, or whatever it is that you're doing. And then you need to connect that narrative back to, okay, so why now? Why Fulbright? Why here? Or make it relevant in a way that provides new information that your statement of grant purpose didn't provide. So in essence, those 3 pages go by very quickly, and you need to be very intentional with the information that you include. We obviously can't include everything specifically in the personal statement, but we want to be very intentional with the items that we do include. The language evaluation is is again not required in all countries, but when it is required, you need to show that you either meet the beginner, intermediate, or the advanced proficiency of that country. And so, for example, if your country requires intermediate Spanish, we recommend reaching out to faculty at Florida State, either in the Spanish department or the German department, or in who speak Portuguese, faculty that can evaluate the language of the country that you're applying to. And so they're going to evaluate both your reading, your writing, and your speaking, and evaluate you on those components. The caveat here is that, so say if you are applying to a country that, like I said, has intermediate Spanish proficiency, but the nature of your research or your academic project really necessitates advanced proficiency. Say you are doing very intricate, field-specific translations, or interviews, or things that that require that you have an advanced or near native fluency in the language. Then it's not going to cut it just to have that intermediate proficiency. So what you can either do is, well, if you have that advanced proficiency, excellent. But if you don't, we need to find ways either through an affiliation letter or in your application to show how you will either gain that proficiency by the time that you go, or you will have support in country of someone who will be able to help you with those translations or those specific aspects of your project. Now, if your Fulbright project does not require language proficiency of any kind, you still have the option to fill out a self-evaluation. So if you believe that your language proficiency perhaps is relevant to the populations that you are working with, or you just want Fulbright to know that you have fluency in another language besides English, you have the opportunity, and we encourage you to make sure that you note that. The letters of recommendation, you do need 3 of them. And when it comes to the world of Fulbright, academic letters from faculty members, specifically in your field, are those top tier letters that we really hope you can acquire, that can speak to not just you as a student, but they can speak to you as a researcher, or your ability to complete this Fulbright project. The affiliation letters are 9 times out of 10, from my experience, the component that is going to give an applicant the most headaches. And sometimes it's not at any fault of their own. It is just a maze that you have to navigate. And so what that affiliation letter essentially is you can submit. 1 is usually required, but you can submit up to 3. But what that letter is essentially stating is, I, either a faculty member in country or an organization or a nonprofit or whatever entity I am in country, will support you in X, Y, and Z ways. So I'm excited about your project. I look forward to it. And this is how I'm going to support you. So an example of that is a student of mine who is currently a semifinalist to Germany for an academic project. It's also a bit of a creative project, but his project is essentially looking at this building that is being developed in Berlin, and this space is being devoted to not just housing for new immigrant populations, but it's being provided as a space for artists in the country to be able to create and display their work, and it's also incorporating local shops and businesses. And so this space, and I'm not going to describe it as well as he can clearly, but is hoping to provide an inclusive space for new and local Germans. It is hoping to mitigate some of the impacts of gentrification, and he's really wanting to go and create this documentary where he's able to interview all of these stakeholders and these people that are involved in this project. And so for Germany, for their academic awards, it's required that you acquire an affiliation letter from an academic of some sort. And so our first priority was getting a letter from a local university, from a faculty member that showed that they would help him craft his project. And so he did do that. But then we also, got a letter from the nonprofit organization that is helping to create this space, as well as the owners of the space itself. And so all three of those letters together are distinct, but all expressed excitement for the project that he was doing. And we started that process in last spring of reaching out to these entities, these people that he had no prior connections to. So you don't need those connections at the start of your Fulbright process to be able to submit a compelling application. You can build those relationships, and that's why it's often the most difficult component. But we also recommend that students use their faculty members, use people they know at Florida State to help be that liaison, to help them reach out. So if you don't have those connections in country already, that's absolutely fine. Talk to your advisor and we can help you navigate that process. You do need your official well, actually, my apologies. You need your just transcripts. They can be unofficial at the time of application, but if you are nominated, you will need to submit your official transcript. So if you want to kind of just just submit the official from the get-go, that's absolutely fine. And of course, you do need your passport, which you should, or at least when I got mine, I just went through Florida State. I went to international programs in the stadium, and so you should still be able to do that. But those are all of the components of the Fulbright application. And so, like I said, for this review process, you need to express, in most likely in multiple ways, that commitment to the mutual peace and understanding component that Fulbright is founded on. The limited in-country experience. So for example, when I talked about McKinsey, they had in-country experience, about like 3 months, I should say. And that was great. They used it to their advantage. But where you start to get into kind of a gray area is, say, if you were in the country for either maybe 6 months to a year consecutively, or you're in the country currently when you're applying, that may qualify as too much in-country experience. And the reason why that may disqualify you is because that lessens the mutual peace and understanding component. If they feel like you already have very intimate knowledge of the culture, the place, the language, the people, then you may not get as much out of this experience as maybe someone else who doesn't. And so they may defer to that other individual. So if you have concerns, again, bring that up with your advisor. We already kind of talked extensively about the language component. You need to meet their minimum threshold. Again, if your project necessitates a higher proficiency, you need to show that in some way in your application. And also, your Fulbright project needs to be inseparable from the country that you are applying to, or from the place that you are applying to. That is going to make for those extremely unique projects, and that's what Fulbright is really looking for. So if I can Control F the name of the country that you're applying to and replace it with any other country, and your project is exactly the same, that is not going to be a compelling project. And so again, we can find very nuanced ways to show that. I already mentioned the word feasible, but everything in your Fulbright application needs to go back to the feasibility of you completing this degree, this research, and the time that you are given. And so that shows up in your essays, that can show up in your letters of recommendation, that can show up in your affiliation letters. And so again, we'll make sure that that shows up in multiple ways in your application. And the last bullet point is a colleague of mine. This is something that he uses, but he wants your essays to have arcs. So he wants them to be authentic, relevant, and compelling. So this is going to be the rough timeline for our internal process. And so the project proposal deadline is it's in early June. And essentially what the project proposal is, it can be we hope that it is extremely detailed, but if it's not, we want at least an understanding of where you're applying to and why. It can be, maybe I'm considering these few countries, but I know this is what my project is, or I know this is the country that I'm applying to, and my project is still a little bit in development. But say we know that applicants are extremely busy and your schedules can be sometimes rigid. So the benefit of meeting that deadline is that if you are free at 2 p.m. on Tuesdays and only 2 p.m. on Tuesdays throughout the summer, then you can lock in that appointment time with your advisor, and every Tuesday check in with your advisor to review your essays. The campus deadline is not set yet because Fulbright hasn't officially set their deadline, their national deadline. But the reason why we have a campus deadline, which is usually in years past, the first week of class, so it's like mid to late August, or it was the second or third week of August. and that is for full and complete applications. So we want your application to be finalized and submitted because we then share that information, your application, with our Fulbright Campus Committee. And that is made up of former Fulbrighters, academics at Florida State, people with very intimate knowledge of this opportunity, or from departments where we get a heavy number of applicants on any given year. And they review your materials holistically, and then we schedule in mid-September an interview with the committee. And so they are going to ask you questions about your project, its feasibility. They may ask you about current events in country, your language proficiency, to get a better sense of you relative to your project. But then after that interview, not only do you get feedback, which we then give you time to implement before the national deadline in early October. But on our end, we actually fill out a CCE form, which stands for Campus Committee Evaluation. And so that is a member of that committee formally endorsing your project. So Florida State formally endorsing your project to move forward. And then we attach that component to your application. So the benefit of applying through Florida State's process is that you get this additional form that, again, all goes back to feasibility of project. That shows that as an institution, we believe that your project is sound. We believe that it can be completed in the time that is given. And we believe that you are the best person to complete that project. Once you submit for the national deadline in October, then begins the very long waiting game. And so you submit in October, and then anywhere from like late December to late January, decisions for semifinalists can roll out. And so for a frame of reference, we just learned last week, which today is February 5th. So we learned last week all of our applicants that were semifinalists. So it was I think it was the last Friday in January. And so if you find out you're a semifinalist, then it's either going to be one of two things. It's either congratulations, keep waiting, or congratulations, here's your interview time. And they can be very rigid with those times, but we also, ONF and OGFA will offer support and practice and prep for that interview, and that is also what your campus interview in September is supposed to do. But we want to help you with that process, so please let us know. Or you will find out, unfortunately, if you are not a semifinalist, and thank you for applying. So after you find out you're a semifinalist, then your application is pushed forward to the screening committee in country, and that's who would be conducting the interview if you have one. And then you would find out either in late March or April if you are selected. Okay, so when it comes to how and I know we've already touched on this a little bit throughout this presentation, but both at ONF and for OGFA, we can help you identify the best. If you have maybe a clear idea of what your project could be, but you're unsure of where to do it, we can help you narrow that down. Or conversely, if you know where you're wanting to study, but you're unsure of your project, we can also help you reflect on the award types for Fulbright and what may be a great opportunity for you at this point in your academic career. Obviously, I've already mentioned that we help you manage all of those components of the Fulbright application, but most specifically is working on that statement of grant purpose and the personal statement. We also work with students in deciding who would be great recommenders, also the affiliates, that is often the hardest part for students to acquire. We help you in reaching out to those individuals if need be. We also, and as you can see, we host writing workshops. And so while we love to help you edit and work on your essays, we understand it's beneficial to have multiple sets of eyes on your application. And so the first one is going to be on April 15th, but we partner you with another student that is applying for the academic award, most likely to a different country. So you can review each other's materials and give each other feedback. We also recommend that you work with perhaps any faculty or mentors that you have at the university. So all together, we're going to help you put together the most compelling application that we can. We also have contacts within Fulbright. So if you do have a question that either myself or a colleague cannot answer, we will make sure to point you in the right direction. This is just our contact information. Again, my name is Jesse. And so feel free to contact me or one of my colleagues. So myself, Josh, and Dr. Filer, we predominantly work with undergraduate students. And then my other colleague, Dr. Stevenson, she predominantly works with graduate students. If you already have an established connection with an advisor, we're not so rigid that we refuse to work with graduates, or that Dr. Stevenson refuses to work with undergraduates. We understand sometimes there is crossover, and that's totally fine. So if you do have an established connection with an advisor, we encourage that you reach out to them. But that is really it from me today. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to this presentation. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out to me or an advisor, and we hope to get started with you on your Fulbright project soon. And just to reiterate, with these academic awards, we understand that it does take time to build these projects. And so that's why we start recruiting for this award very early in the spring semester. So we don't need to get started writing now, but we would love to at least get started with you in terms of reflecting on your project and your ideas and what it could become. And so we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you again, and I hope you have a wonderful day.